Hey everyone, as you can see I have two phones here. On the left hand side I've got the Huawei P30. On the right hand side I've got the iPhone 11 Pro Max. Android or iOS. This is a debate that has been going on for years, and it is still something that I see a lot of people talking about. Now this is my phone and I have mainly been buying Android phones for the last 6 or 7 years. My last Apple phone was an iPhone 4. This is actually my friend Gary's phone. My last one I bought in 2010. I used it for a year or two. I loved it. I had an iPad at the time as well. But since then, I've mainly been tied into the Android world. So, what is iOS like? As someone who is, well, really an Android user, what would I say about iOS? I would say it's great. Spoiler alert, I like iOS, I like Android. And this is the thing, guys. The debate as to whether Android or iOS is best, I think that this isn't really as relevant as it was many years ago. Now, when Android first came out, I had the second ever Android phone and it was very, very limited. Now, the same could be said about the earlier versions of iOS, but when I purchased iPhone 4, I think at that point, the iPhones were so far ahead of the Android phones. You know, iOS was just such a refined ecosystem when compared to Android at that time. In 2019, going into 2020, that is not the case anymore. Over the last 7 or 8 years, Android has copied some things from iOS. iOS has copied many things from Android, and the two of them have kind of converged into, I'm not going to say the same product or a similar product, but really there's more similarities now than there are differences. In the past, people would say that Apple was more refined, it was easier to use, Android was easier to customize, you had more flexibility. To an extent, that is still true in some areas. You know, with Android, you do have more options when it comes to unlocking things and rooting your phone and all that. But I would also argue as well that the majority of people who do buy an Android phone, they're not rooting their phone, they're not tweaking the software and doing all these other things. Yes, that is something that some people do, but I would say that for most average users, most general users, well, they're not doing that. They're just using the operating system as it is presented to them. And when it comes to organizing everything, you know, you've got folders in iOS now. That's something that wasn't there in the past. You've got widgets, you've got different things like that. And, you know, I've only spent a short time with this Apple iPhone 11 Pro Max, and yes, there are differences. Yes, you know, as far as navigating things, as far as, you know, changing the settings and different things, things are a little bit different. Of course they are. Of course things are different. But iOS is very, very easy to use. And I don't think any Android user would have a major problem jumping to iOS. And by that same token, I don't think anyone who's an Apple user would find it hard to go into the Android world. There's slight differences, and when you're looking to tweak something, then of course, you know, you're going to have to do things a little bit differently. There's different things that you do on an iPhone that you do very differently on Android, and vice versa. But certainly with the iPhone 11 Pro Max, you know, one of the first things I noticed is just how snappy this is. The CPU in this phone is amazing. And of course, that comes down to the phone itself. Obviously, there are less powerful iPhones out there. But yeah, you know, there is slight differences as far as how you navigate things and how you operate things. Just simple things as well as far as settings. Nearly everything is placed in one big settings page, whereas I'm used to navigating a few screens to get to where I want to go. It's not a deal breaker, it's just different. And it's the same with the camera. When you are operating the camera, and you can see my camera there. When you're operating the camera, the default iPhone app, generally speaking, this is a very easy to use interface. It's a very simplified interface in that nearly all the settings are available with just one click or not. So for example, if you're looking at video, you can see it's 4K. I can change it to HD, change it back. I can change it 30, 60, 24 frames per second. It's just a one-click system, and that's generally how iOS works. Now, in comparison, if you look at the camera app, now this is the one from Huawei. Every camera app on an Android phone is a little bit different, but generally speaking, it's all like this. It's very similar down the bottom as far as you changing from photo to video, but then what you have is a general settings area where you go in and you change some things and you change the default settings. Of course, there are some, quick presets there, but what I would say is, generally speaking, with most of the Android phones I've used, you've got the different options down the bottom, but then there is a general settings area. In comparison with iPhone, most of the settings there are kind of presets where you've got a few different options. Like here in video, you've got a few different options as far as zooming. You can see it there. There's a preset for 0.5, 1, and 2. But again, all the options here are in the one screen. So it's a little bit simple and a little bit of a simpler interface. There is a good argument that, again, it comes down to that cliche, I guess, that you've got more options with Android. And generally speaking, yeah, there's a few more tweaks available in Android, as far as how you change things. But it does depend on the phone. It does depend on the app as well. This is by no means a bad experience. In fact, I was really enjoying how simple this user interface was. And again, it comes down to the fact that sometimes these additional customization options are really, really useful, but quite a lot of the time you don't need them, and it's extra options just being there that you don't need. So again, I kind of gave you a spoiler alert at the beginning here, but what I will say, I have used both the operating systems, but it has been several years since I've used iOS every single day. And I have noticed a big change. iOS is a lot more like Android. And Android is without doubt a lot more like iOS. These operating systems have borrowed so much from each other that we're at the point now where I think that anyone, regardless of what phone you're using, can jump over to the other platform. Now, my friend Kenny, for example, he jumped over from iOS back to Android, and he was amazed at how simple it was. I think there's a lot of Apple users that have got this preconception that Android is difficult to use, it's not user-friendly, and it's simply not the case. I would say that most Apple users can switch to Android, and I don't think they would have any problems with it. Yes, there's going to be some things they don't like. They might get annoyed that the settings are set up in a different way, but the same can be said the other way. And I do think that for most smartphone users, and yes, some people get tied into the Apple ecosystem or the Android ecosystem so much that they really fear change and they don't want to do anything differently. But I would say that most people would be able to switch, between one to the other and back. There are differences, and there are still, a little bit more options in the Android world, but most of the time you don't need that. And I do think that as someone that is used to all these additional options, that is used to all these customization options, there's a lot more options in iOS than there used to be. But I do appreciate this kind of simplified user interface as well. I do think it does simplify things. It does make things a little bit easier in many situations. So, I'm not really talking about these phones per se. This applies to all Android phones and all Apple phones. I would say that both operating systems are good. There are differences. Of course, there's differences. They do things a little bit differently. But generally speaking, I think that as an Android user, I really don't think there's a massive difference between these operating systems now. 5-6 years ago, I think there was. 10 years ago, there definitely was. But today, 2019, I honestly think that anyone can switch from one platform to the other without any kind of major inconvenience. And my overall experience with this so far, with the iPhone 11 in particular, the iPhone 11 Pro Max, is that it's snappy. The microphone seems quite good. The speakers seem quite good. It's just a nice experience overall. The main sticking point for most Android users is the fact that if you're opting for an Apple phone, you'll probably be paying a little bit more for that experience. So there might be some Android users that want a more refined product, maybe something with better build quality, and they might want to look at an Apple phone. But, you know, at the same token, I know there's a lot of Apple users that maybe aren't happy at the high prices of an Apple phone. And I think for those users, those people can switch back to Android. And I don't think they'll have a major problem. Overall, I think iOS is good. I really do think it's good. It's a good experience. It's very easy to navigate, very easy to use. It's been several years since I've used iOS, you know, other than just borrowing a friend's phone and kind of messing about with it. This is the first time I've spent some time with iOS in a long time, but overall, it's a very pleasant experience. Very easy to use and absolutely no complaints from an Android user. Thanks for watching, guys. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Give me your thoughts on the Android operating system, iOS. Let me know what you think about it. Let me know if you think there's any major differences. To me, yes, there are differences. There are settings differences. You do things a little bit different, a little bit of a different way. But today in 2019, I really don't think there is a major difference between them. Both of these are refined products. They're efficient, they work well, and they're very easy to use. Thanks for watching, guys. I do appreciate it. I'd love to hear your thoughts on all of this. So please do leave a comment and I'll speak to you all in the next one. Take care.